Welcome to Einstein A.I. Top 10 Houses of Horror, so disturbing, they were demolished. Number 10. Fred and Rose West will go down in history as one of the worst serial killer duos ever. They lived at 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester City, England, and what took place behind closed doors was so disturbing that the home has since been flattened. The sinister couple murdered at least 10 young women together between 1971 and 1987. Fred killed more beforehand. The victims were then dismembered and buried in either the cellar or the garden. The two even threatened their children that they too would end up under the patio. Behind bars, Fred became depressed when Rose refused to reply to any of his letters, and he took his own life in prison. Initially, Rose denied any knowledge of the murders, but her web of lies soon fell apart and she was sentenced to life for her involvement. 2 decades after the crimes, Gloucester City Council purchased the House of Horrors, as it had come to be called. They knocked it down, and turned the former site into a public walkway. Still, nobody will forget in a hurry what happened at 25 Cromwell Street. Number 9. Ariel Castro's house. Ariel Castro kidnapped 3 female victims on separate occasions between 2002 and 2004 when they were aged 14, 16, and 20 years old. He then held them captive at his home in Cleveland, Ohio. The young girls, who grew into women during their decade of hell, were kept in darkness, surrounded by boarded windows and with only a small hole providing any circulation. Castro repeatedly abused them and even fathered a daughter with one of his victims. She gave birth in a small inflatable swimming pool. In 2013, one of the brave victims was able to escape when Castro failed to lock the inside door. She screamed a cry of help that alerted the neighbors. Castro was arrested that same evening, but he only lived out 1 month of his life sentence before he hanged himself with a bedsheet in prison. It took just 1 hour and 20 minutes for his former home to be demolished as spectators cheered from the street. Number 8. The Bloody Bender's house. More than 140 years ago, one family committed such evil that they became known as the Bloody Benders. The Labette County, Kansas family consisted of 4 people: John Bender, his wife Elvira, and their children John Jr. and Kate. Some sources claim that Kate was actually John Jr.'s common-law wife. From 1869 to 1872, the family would invite travelers into their home with the sole intention of smashing their skulls, cutting their throats, and stealing all their possessions. When members of the community noticed the rise in missing persons traveling through the area, they called a meeting. A few days after that meeting, the Benders family home was abandoned, and locals discovered a terrible odor coming from inside. After a proper investigation, the bodies of their 11 victims were uncovered. However, other missing persons cases could tie the bloodthirsty family to as many as 21 murders. The since demolished house is nowadays nothing more than a gravel road 2 hours southeast of Wichita. Ghost hunters travel there just to soak up any sensation of its sinister history. Number 7. Ted Bundy's house. Ted Bundy confessed to the murders of 30 young women and girls in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. However, the real victim count is believed to be much higher, as he buried the corpses in several secluded areas. One location that became a killing spot for him was Emigration Canyon, Utah. The serial killer's former rooming house has since been destroyed, leaving only a scatter of bricks. However, the sinister cellar is still intact, which encourages ghost hunters and other true crime fans who are chasing a creepy experience. Bundy moved to Utah when he was accepted at the University of Utah Law School in August 1974. It's believed he kidnapped and murdered 8 victims aged between 16 and 18 during his time in the state. The surrounding area of Bundy's cellar would have been the last place some of these women saw before their lives were stolen from them. Bundy's own lawyer labeled him the very definition of heartless evil. He was sentenced to death and died on the electric chair in 1989. Number 6. H. Holmes is known in history as Chicago's first serial killer. This man, or monster, is believed to have killed anywhere from 20 to over 100 people, mostly women, in his so-called murder castle. His victims were sometimes beaten to death, strangled, or possibly even gassed. Their bodies were thrown into the cellar pit, where quicklime and acid made fast work of their flesh, reducing them to mere bones. Holmes would sometimes sell the skeletons for a quick profit. Other bodies were burned in the basement's kiln. Holmes was convicted of murder and insurance fraud and was executed on May 7, 1896. Before his execution, his murder castle caught on fire, but it didn't burn to the ground. Only the top 2 floors needed to be redone, and the ugly, industrial-style building remained in place until the late 1930s. At that time, the building was torn down, and a post office was built on the plot. All that remains of the castle is an underground escape tunnel that leads away from where it originally stood and exits at an escape hatch. Demon House. There were no murderers associated with the Demon House located in Gary, Indiana, but that didn't stop the house from being evil. According to former residents, it was a hotbed of demonic activity, which led to possession and bodily harm of the people who lived there. The house was so evil that Ghost Adventures investigator Zach Bagans bought it from the owner in 2014 and began to work on a documentary about the place, claiming that he had never entered a house as evil as this one. Not only did Zach make wild claims about the house, but members of law enforcement have also said that there was something evil within the house. Zach had the house destroyed in early 2016. Number 4. The Turpin House. In Perris, California, the Turpins had 13 children in chains all over the house. They were underfed and often beaten in the dark. In January 2018, one of the girls managed to sneak out a window and expose the situation. She had been working on her escape plan for more than 2 years. The children were tied up for weeks or even months at a time, were allowed to shower only once a year, and were not provided with any kind of entertainment. They were only allowed to write in journals. The torture was also psychological. The couple would buy food, including pies, and let it sit on the table or counter, but the children were not permitted to eat the food. The kids had never even heard of medications or dental care. A disturbing Facebook profile of the couple showed shining like family pictures and a fake Elvis for a fake wedding. From 2 to 29-year-old, the children were so emaciated that they looked like they were years younger. They did not go to school. The Turpin father handled his children's education with a perfectly legal home school. Pure horror. Number 3. The Small House That Smelled of Corpses. In late 2017, the police came across 9 corpses in a house in Tokyo's suburbs. The bodies were mutilated, beheaded, and stacked in cardboard boxes. The 27-year-old suspected murderer was using an arguably efficient technique to cover the smell. He had covered the bodies with cat litter. The neighbors had been complaining about the odor, but they assumed it was coming from the sewers. When investigating the disappearance of a 23-year-old woman, investigators linked her to the house's occupant. The missing woman had contacted the man via social media, while seeking someone for a suicide pact. The two were captured on security cameras outside a train station near the horror apartment. The death penalty still exists in Japan. If this man is convicted of multiple murders, he won't get the same treatment as his victims because the Japanese don't use the guillotine. Their death penalty is carried out by hanging. The Killer Clown House. The house of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who brutally murdered 33 boys and young men inside his home, was torn apart during the search for bodies in the spring of 1979. The ugly lot was an awful reminder, and it sat empty until 1988, when the ground was broken to make way for a new home. While some felt that the space was haunted, other neighbors were relieved. Instead of having an ugly, vacant lot where the killer had lived, the new home would make the neighborhood feel normal again. But did it? And number 1. Anthony Sowell and the Rotten Corpses. The biggest problem when killing people in your own house is the smell. After some time, Cleveland investigators ended up taking into account the repeated complaints from the people of a back street who did not understand why it was stinking so much around their homes. In 2009, law enforcement finally broke into Anthony Sowell's house. Sowell was a veteran who had become a serial killer. He had been convicted and sentenced in a rape case in 1989 and was released from prison in 2005. Apparently, he had learned his lesson from his past experience and decided to strangle every new victim after raping them. Then he would bury the bodies in his garden or cut them into pieces. With one victim, police found only her head in the house. 1 week before the morbid discovery, the neighbors had seen a naked woman falling from Sowell's second-floor balcony into the garden, but the police did not take any action. Investigators found 6 rotting female corpses inside the house and 5 more buried in the garden. Sowell was convicted July 22 of aggravated murder in 11 women's deaths. His house was demolished that winter, and the citizens of Cleveland are safe once more. Well then, that's enough for now. Subscribe Young Humans for more mind-blowing facts about your reality, and for other interesting stories of what could be. I've been Einstein AI. Thank you for your time.